On the night of July 11, 2015, something extraordinary and almost cinematic unfolded inside one of Mexico's most secure prisons. In the remote Altiplano maximum security facility designed to hold the country's most dangerous criminals, an inmate calmly stepped into the shower of his solitary cell. What made this shower so unique was that it was the only place not monitored by the prison's relentless 24/7 surveillance cameras, a small blind spot in an otherwise impenetrable fortress. Minutes slipped by. The prisoner didn't emerge. Alarms began to sound. Panic spread among the prison guards as they burst into the cell, only to find it empty. The man, the world's most notorious drug lord, had vanished without a trace. What followed was a jaw-dropping revelation that stunned authorities and shocked the entire world. Beneath the shower floor was a secret trapdoor, carefully concealed and expertly engineered. It led down into a mile-long tunnel carved deep underground, a tunnel that was no ordinary escape route. It was fitted with electric lighting, a ventilation system pumping fresh air, and even a waiting motorbike, perfectly poised to whisk him away at lightning speed. This was no spontaneous breakout. It was a meticulously planned operation, masterminded by one of the most cunning and ruthless criminals of our time. The man who escaped that night, Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán, a name synonymous with fear, power, and relentless brutality. El Chapo was the leader of the Sinaloa Cartel, arguably the most powerful and violent drug trafficking organization on the planet. He was believed to be responsible for thousands of deaths, a man who ruled the global narcotics trade with an iron fist, evading capture for decades. His 2015 escape from Altiplano was not just a prison break, it was a bold statement. It revealed the extent of his reach, his resources, and his unwavering determination to remain free. Join us as we unravel the incredible story behind El Chapo's most infamous escape, a tale of deception, danger, and a criminal empire that continues to cast its shadow across the world. Joaquín Archibaldo Guzmán Loera, forever etched into history as El Chapo, was born on April 4, 1957, in the humble village of La Tuna, nestled deep within Mexico's rugged Sinaloa region. This small, remote community shaped the early life of a boy who would later become one of the most notorious figures in global criminal history. His father, Emilio Guzmán Bustillo, was a farmer by trade, tending to a modest herd of cattle passed down through generations. Yet accounts of Emilio's character vary widely. Some sources depict him as a violent man, an alcoholic and womanizer whose temper often boiled over into abuse toward his family, including young Joaquin. These stories paint a portrait of a harsh upbringing marked by fear and hardship. However, other members of El Chapo's extended family challenge this darker image. They describe Emilio not as violent, but rather as a man lacking ambition, unwilling to engage in steady work, and often shirking responsibility. Regardless of the conflicting narratives, what remains clear is that Joaquin's childhood was far from easy. In stark contrast, his mother, Maria Consuelo Loera Pérez, stood as a pillar of resilience and unwavering strength. Known for her tireless dedication and indomitable spirit, Maria Consuelo raised 7 children while managing the family's small but vital farm. Her relentless work ethic and ability to endure hardship left a lasting impression on Joaquin, instilling in him a sense of determination and survival. Their bond was especially strong. Even after Joaquin rose to international notoriety and lived life constantly on the run from law enforcement, he maintained regular visits to his mother. She lived in a comfortable compound at the heart of La Tuna, a home Joaquin himself had commissioned and built for her, a rare symbol of his love and loyalty amid a life shadowed by crime and violence. Together, Emilio and Maria Consuelo had 7 children, 2 daughters, Almida and Bernarda, and 5 sons, Miguel Angel, Aureliano, Emilio, Arturo, and Joaquín, the youngest and eventually the most infamous among them. This family, with all its complexities, was the foundation upon which the legend of El Chapo was built. A story rooted in rural poverty, family ties, and a relentless drive that would ultimately reshape the criminal underworld forever. El Chapo was infamous not only for his brutal violence, but also for his insatiable appetite for women, whom he often referred to as his vitamins. His personal life was as complex as his criminal empire. Reports suggest he had at least 4 legally recognized wives, a multitude of lovers, and fathered no fewer than 15 children. This sprawling family was both a testament to his charisma and a reflection of the culture surrounding the cartel lifestyle. Among his many offspring, 3 sons stand out prominently: Ovidio, Ivan, and Jesus Alfredo Guzmán. These sons have played significant roles in continuing their father's legacy. Following Ovidio's dramatic arrest in January 2023, leadership of the Sinaloa Cartel shifted firmly to Ivan and Jesus Alfredo, who have been groomed from a very young age to step into the family business. Their rise marks the next chapter in the cartel's violent and lucrative saga. In terms of physical appearance, El Chapo was striking in a deceptively unassuming way. His dark brown eyes, coupled with a thick black mustache and matching jet black hair, made him instantly recognizable to those who encountered him. Standing at just 5 feet 6 inches tall, relatively short compared to many of his contemporaries, he earned the infamous nickname El Chapo, which in Mexican Spanish means shorty. His voice was another distinctive trait. He spoke with a nasal tone, heavily laced with his native Sinaloan accent. Adding to this was a pronounced stutter, a speech pattern that paradoxically became one of his most well-known trademarks. But despite his modest stature and unique mannerisms, El Chapo's personality was anything but small. He was cold and ruthless, a man who calculated every move with chilling precision. His decisions were often marked by brutality and complete absence of empathy or remorse. In the violent world he ruled, El Chapo was both feared and respected, embodying the perfect storm of cunning intellect and merciless determination. In 2011, a chilling and brutal execution took place on the side of a dusty road. The victim wasn't killed for a serious crime like theft or betrayal. Instead, his offense was shockingly trivial. He was executed simply because he lied about being out of town. This ruthless act sent a clear and terrifying message to anyone who dared cross the boundaries set by El Chapo. While Joaquín Guzmán could be terrifyingly cruel and violent when it suited his purposes, many who knew him also described a different side of the man, one that was calm, composed, and razor-sharp when it came to business dealings. Despite his limited formal education and struggles with reading, El Chapo was widely regarded as level-headed and methodical. He had an uncanny obsession with making deals and navigating complex negotiations, which often made him a voice of reason within the violent chaos of the cartel world. Remarkably, he was known to discourage his men from resorting to unnecessary violence, believing that such brutality could bring unwanted attention and jeopardize the cartel's operations. This pragmatic approach set him apart from many other ruthless criminals, marking him as a strategic thinker who understood the long game. However, lurking beneath this calculated exterior was a dark and terrifying side that never quite disappeared. One former associate recounted a horrifying sight near one of El Chapo's secret hideouts, deep in the treacherous Sinaloan mountains. There, chained naked to a tree, was a man, a living warning to anyone who dared to defy or betray Guzmán. This grim spectacle was just one of the many brutal tactics El Chapo employed to instill fear and maintain absolute control over his empire. Such stories serve as chilling reminders of the merciless nature of the man behind the legend, a man who balanced cold calculation with terrifying savagery in equal measure. Very little is definitively known about the early life of Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán, and perhaps that mystery only adds to the myth surrounding him. The details that do exist come in fragments, whispered by relatives or former acquaintances, scattered like puzzle pieces across time. But those scattered memories reveal glimpses of a boy who was, even then, different. From a very young age, Joaquín displayed signs of unusual ambition. One cousin recalled a peculiar habit. Young Joaquín would gather stacks of cut-up paper, carefully arrange and bundle them to resemble thick wads of cash, and then proudly present them to his mother, asking her to save his money. It was innocent make-believe, but beneath it something deeper, a child already obsessed with the idea of wealth, status, and power. By the time he was just a boy, El Chapo was already working. He began selling oranges and soft drinks along the roadside between his hometown, La Tuna, and a nearby village. He would walk for miles under the blistering sun, carrying crates or pushing carts. It wasn't much, but it was a start, the beginning of a work ethic that would later be transformed into cartel efficiency. Even then, young Joaquín wanted to be seen. He didn't just want to earn money, he wanted to stand out. On Sundays, when extended family would gather, he'd dress in his best clothes, drape himself in fake gold chains, and strut proudly among the adults. Of course, the cheap metal would often turn his neck green, but he didn't care. To him, it wasn't about what the jewelry was made of. It was about what it symbolized: power, respect, admiration. Despite these flashes of ambition, he was still just a child. A boy who spent afternoons helping his parents tend to cattle on their modest farm, or playing volleyball with the neighborhood kids in the dusty clearings between houses. But life in La Tuna wasn't all games and dreams. The region of Sinaloa, where Joaquín was born and raised, is known for its beauty, but also for its deep poverty and isolation. Opportunities were scarce. Many children never finished school. For most, the only real escape from rural hardship came through two paths: migration or crime. And for young Joaquín, school wasn't the path. He reportedly only made it as far as the 3rd grade before dropping out, spending more and more of his time working in the fields or trying to earn whatever small coins he could. The more he worked, the more he learned about survival, about how to get ahead in a world that gave him very little to start with. It was in these formative years that the seeds of something darker were planted. Not just ambition, but hunger. Not just play-acting wealth, but a drive to achieve it, by any means necessary. Behind his quiet demeanor and boyish face was a mind already shaping itself for something far more dangerous than selling oranges. A mind that would one day outmaneuver governments, build subterranean escape routes, and run the most powerful drug empire on earth. As Joaquín grew older, the illusions of childhood quickly faded, replaced by the harsh, unforgiving realities of life in rural Sinaloa. He witnessed firsthand the deep corruption and brutality that pulsed through the veins of government power, especially toward those who had the least: the poor farmers, the landless laborers, and the small-time growers trying to survive at the bottom rung of the drug trade. According to his sister, life in their village was often interrupted by the sudden and terrifying presence of armed soldiers. These weren't orderly law enforcement patrols. They were raids, invasions under the cover of darkness. The sound of boots stomping through dirt roads, the clanging of rifles against wooden doors, and the screams of families torn from sleep became disturbingly common. Night after night, fear gripped the village. Guzmán saw friends dragged out of their homes, fathers humiliated in front of their children, mothers weeping as their sons were accused of crimes without evidence. Sometimes they came back, sometimes they didn't. And Joaquín himself wasn't spared. On more than one occasion, he clashed directly with government forces. Armed confrontations erupted, fueled by rage, desperation, and a deep sense of injustice. In some cases, he was physically assaulted, beaten down in front of his own mother, Maria Consuelo, forced to endure the unbearable sight of her son, bloodied by the very people who were supposed to represent order and justice. These moments were more than just humiliations. They were defining scars, wounds that went deeper than skin. From those brutal encounters, Guzmán learned a lesson that would stay with him for the rest of his life. It was a truth that would shape his worldview, harden his heart, and guide the ruthless empire he would one day create. In his world, fear ruled more effectively than law. Respect didn't come from a badge or a title. It came from power, from dominance, from being the one people were too afraid to cross. And so, while the government tried to control the countryside with violence, young Joaquin quietly absorbed every lesson. He realized that to survive, to rise, he would have to become more feared than those who beat him. And eventually, he did. Born into poverty, raised in violence, surrounded by corruption, Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán grew up in a world where power was taken, not given. And from a young age, he absorbed a brutal truth that would guide every step of his rise. To get ahead, anything was necessary, even blood. In the rugged hills of Sinaloa, young Joaquin's earliest lessons didn't come from school books or classrooms. They came from the land, from sweat, from survival. His first exposure to the drug trade began not through choice, but inheritance. His own father, Emilio Guzmán, a modest farmer, had long abandoned legitimate work and was cultivating illegal poppy crops, the raw material for heroin, tucked away in the shadows of the mountains. As just a boy, El Chapo worked as a farmhand for his father, tending to these forbidden fields, learning the rhythms of the drug harvest, when to plant, when to cut, and most importantly, when to disappear if soldiers came too close. There were no dreams of college, no promises of escape, only the cold, unspoken understanding that in Sinaloa, poverty didn't just hold you down, it buried you, unless you fought your way out. Still a teenager, Guzmán realized that staying in La Tuna meant a lifetime of hunger, hard labor, and submission. So he made a move that would change the course of history. He left his village and headed to Badiraguato, a nearby town infamous for being the cradle of some of Mexico's most dangerous drug lords. And that's where his ambition began to pay off. He wasn't the biggest, he wasn't the loudest, but he was relentless. In Badiraguato, he started as an errand boy, running small tasks, delivering packages, keeping his ears open and his mouth shut. But those who watched him saw something different in the young man. With the short stature and sharp eyes, he was focused, disciplined, and absolutely fearless. Before long, Guzmán began working under Pedro Avilés, one of the early pioneers of the Mexican drug trade. It was under Avilés that he learned the inner workings of trafficking, the logistics, the routes, the negotiations. But most importantly, he learned something no mentor could teach: how to seize power when the moment came. And when it did, El Chapo didn't hesitate. El Chapo's ascent through the criminal underworld was anything but accidental. Fueled by ambition, survival instinct, and a growing reputation for being both disciplined and deadly, he began rising quickly through the ranks of the Guadalajara Cartel, then the most powerful drug syndicate in Mexico. At the top stood Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo, a former federal police officer turned kingpin, known as El Padrino, the Godfather. He controlled the majority of the drug trafficking corridors running through Sinaloa, Durango, and Chihuahua, territories that would later be known as the Golden Triangle. It was the late 1970s, and the drug trade wasn't just growing, it was erupting. In the United States, the rise of hippie counterculture during the 60s had led to a booming demand for marijuana, heroin, and later, cocaine. But the real turning point came in 1972, when the US dismantled a major heroin trafficking network known as the French Connection, a supply chain that had funneled vast quantities of heroin from Turkey through France into American cities. With that route cut off, the spotlight shifted south. Sinaloa stepped up to meet the demand. The rugged terrain of northwestern Mexico, remote, mountainous, and nearly impenetrable, was ideal for cultivating poppy and cannabis crops. Small villages became growing hubs, and cartel leaders expanded operations with a new level of coordination, aided by corrupt government officials and military officers. But with greater supply came greater profit, and with greater profit came unwanted attention. By 1975, the Mexican government, under pressure from the United States and the DEA, launched Operation Condor, one of the largest drug eradication campaigns in Latin American history. It was a scorched earth operation. Helicopters swept low over fields, spraying defoliants to kill the crops. Soldiers torched entire plantations, both legal and illegal, indiscriminately. Entire communities were torn apart as federal forces conducted mass arrests, interrogations, and executions. Thousands of suspected traffickers and innocent farmers alike were hunted down, tortured, and in many cases, killed without trial. But while Operation Condor was publicly marketed as a war on drugs, behind the scenes, it became a battle for power and bribes. Corruption ran deep. Federal and state agencies often competed, not for justice, but for control over the flow of narco money. Entire units were compromised. Bribes determined who lived, who died, and who got arrested. As Sinaloa became saturated with military patrols, checkpoints, and air surveillance, many traffickers were either killed or forced into hiding. But El Chapo made a different move, a strategic one. He quietly relocated to the city of Guadalajara, where the cartel's leadership was headquartered. There, under the protection and guidance of Felix Gallardo, he continued operating as a trafficker, gradually taking on more responsibility. He managed shipments, coordinated logistics, and ensured the safe passage of narcotics northward. In Guadalajara, El Chapo honed his skills in high-level cartel politics. He learned how to move drugs on a massive scale, how to negotiate international deals, and more importantly, how to outmaneuver both law enforcement and rival traffickers. It was here, in the shadows of Mexico's second-largest city, that Joaquín Guzmán stopped being just another sicario or low-level trafficker. He was becoming a power player, laying the foundations for what would one day become the Sinaloa Cartel, the most powerful drug empire the world has ever known. But in 1984, Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán felt the winds shifting, and he saw a new opportunity on the horizon. Sensing that the drug landscape was evolving and that proximity to new routes and networks could accelerate his rise, he made a bold move. He relocated to the central Mexican state of Zacatecas, far from the mountainous terrain of Sinaloa that had shaped his early years. There, he began working under the quiet yet deeply respected trafficker Juan José Esparragoza Moreno, better known in the underworld as El Azul, the Blue One. Unlike many cartel figures of the era, El Azul was calm, calculating, and known for his diplomacy. He wasn't flashy. He didn't seek the spotlight, but he commanded deep respect among his peers and had built a formidable reputation as a strategic thinker and a master of negotiation. El Azul became one of El Chapo's earliest and most influential mentors. Under his guidance, El Chapo expanded his skills far beyond brute force. He learned how to launder money, coordinate international shipments, and navigate the corrupt networks of law enforcement and politics that made the drug trade possible at the highest levels. By this time, El Chapo had already carved out a solid reputation for himself as a mid-level trafficker. He was no longer just a street-level operator. He was managing logistics, moving serious weight, and commanding his own small army of loyal men. Still, he answered to higher bosses. He wasn't at the top yet, but everything was about to change. In 1985, a single act of violence would send shockwaves through the criminal world and ignite a firestorm that would dismantle the very cartel El Chapo had grown up under. That year, DEA agent Enrique Kiki Camarena, stationed in Guadalajara and investigating cartel operations, was kidnapped, brutally tortured and murdered. The order had allegedly come from none other than Felix Gallardo, El Chapo's former mentor and the reigning head of the Guadalajara cartel. The murder of a U.S. federal agent was more than a criminal act. It was a declaration of war, and the U.S. government responded with overwhelming force. Pressure from Washington intensified. The DEA, along with Mexican authorities, launched an aggressive and far-reaching campaign to bring those responsible to justice. Over the next 4 years, the once mighty Guadalajara cartel was systematically dismantled. Its leaders were hunted down, arrested, or forced into hiding. Alliances crumbled, territories were thrown into chaos. The old guard was falling, fast. And in the vacuum that followed, something new began to rise. A new generation of traffickers, younger, more ruthless, and more ambitious, stepped in to claim what was left of the empire. Among them stood El Chapo Guzmán. He was no longer just a loyal foot soldier, no longer in the shadows of Felix Gallardo or even El Azul. With the collapse of the Guadalajara cartel, El Chapo, along with other emerging figures like Ismael El Mayo Zambada and Hector El Güero Palma, seized the moment. They divided the routes, established new alliances, and began building what would become the most powerful drug trafficking organization in the world, the Sinaloa Cartel. And El Chapo, once a poor boy selling oranges in La Tuna, was now standing at the edge of power, ready to rewrite the rules of the game. By the late 1980s, Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán had already begun reshaping the criminal underworld in his own image. The Sinaloa Cartel, still in its early stages, was rapidly growing in influence, evolving from a regional operation into a rising powerhouse in the global drug trade. But at the time, it was still a relatively small and tightly knit group. Behind closed doors, the cartel was composed of just 25 hand-picked members, loyal, ruthless, and fiercely disciplined. These weren't street dealers or common criminals. They were trusted operatives, men El Chapo could rely on without question. Their operations were based out of 2 strategic locations, one in Guadalajara, the heart of Mexico's trafficking networks, the other in Agua Prieta, a gritty border town in the state of Sonora, positioned directly across from Douglas, Arizona. It was in Agua Prieta that El Chapo would unveil one of his earliest and most revolutionary innovations. Under the cover of an unassuming building, his men constructed something no one had ever dared attempt on this scale: a fully operational smuggling tunnel. Stretching across the US-Mexico border, this tunnel was a game changer, an underground highway for narcotics, cash, and contraband. It was narrow, dark, and expertly engineered, running directly beneath the line that separated 2 nations. Its entrance was pure genius, hidden in plain sight. Disguised beneath an ordinary pool table, the tunnel could be accessed with the simple flick of a switch. The keys. Table would slide aside, revealing a secret hatch that led into the depths below. From there, drugs could move undetected straight into the United States, bypassing border patrols, checkpoints, and all conventional forms of surveillance. For El Chapo, this was more than just clever smuggling. This was a symbol of control, audacity, and brilliance, a message to rivals and authorities alike. He was not playing by their rules. This tunnel would become one of the first in a long legacy of underground passages, a tactic that would earn El Chapo global infamy as the king of the tunnels. But this was only the beginning. What El Chapo had accomplished with a small crew and a hidden hatch was just a preview of what was to come. He wasn't just thinking locally. He wasn't even thinking nationally. He was thinking globally. With each new shipment, each new route, and each new innovation, El Chapo was quietly laying the foundation for an empire that would soon span continents. And what came next would shake the entire world, From the streets of Sinaloa to the cities of the United States, to the highest levels of law enforcement and international diplomacy. El Chapo was no longer just a name. He was becoming a legend. Title suggestion: How El Chapo Built a Drug Empire Beneath the Border and Started a War video script. Beneath the scorching sun of northern Mexico, far from the eyes of authorities, something extraordinary was happening.